and we're talking in other states, I was just at this meeting, and I heard this amazing lady. And I'm thinking, wait a minute. Why isn't she speaking at my conference? Why is she traveling all over the United States in high demand when she should be right here talking here? That was my fault. So here today we have Kimberly Ells talking about all the things that she has learned over the years about the family. She is the author of the Invincible Family, this great book, Why the Global Campaign to Crush Motherhood and Fatherhood Can't Win. You've got to get that book. You need to read that book. It is a great book. Kimberly, you want to come and share your information, and you can read all about her in the program.
Thank you, Gail. You're very gracious. Thank you for that introduction. I'm so happy to be with you today. I'm standing before you today because I'm a mother. Those are my best and most strong credentials. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights says, the family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state. And this is true. In too many instances, we have forgotten this in our lives and in public policy. We must return to prioritizing the family in our public policy. Since my topic today is defending the family as the fundamental unit of society, here's a picture of my family. I have 4 daughters, one of whom is here today, and we had them all in very close succession. The 4th one was born 2 days before the oldest one went to kindergarten. So it was busy at our house, as I'm sure it has been at many of your homes. And then you see the little guy in the middle? This was a surprise. 12 years after we had our others, I got pregnant again at age 42 in my old age. And I never knew how old I was until I became pregnant at that ancient age. And all the comments, I had to develop a bit of a thick skin being pregnant at age 42. I was then involved in what was called geriatric pregnancy, which was fun. And but believe it or not, I survived, and my son is great, and he's 5 years old now, and we absolutely love him. So that's my family, and that's why I do everything that I do. Let me share a snippet of conversation between me and my son that happened just a few months ago. Recently, while at the top of a water slide, it was actually Crystal Hot Springs up in Honeyville, we were about to climb down. My boy was climbing onto my lap. We were about to go on the crazy ride down the water slide, and he just stops, and he says to me, "Mom, you're my favorite girl in the whole world. I love you more than anyone else." And then he got on my lap, and down we went on the slide. And I just loved that. And he just loves me, and I love him that way, just like you love your children. And what if I had listened to the woman who was working at the doctor's office who told me in my aged state, if I were you, I'd have to slip my wrists. This is the woman who was taking my blood. And I was like, I didn't know what to say. But what if I had listened to her? What if I had listened to the narrative that's out there for today for women that tells them that if their child is inconvenient for them, that they can just simply abort it, or in a sense, slit his wrists, which of course I didn't do. And I'm so thankful for that. But this is more than just a sweet snippet about me and my son. This points to the heart of the purpose of life, the purpose of families, and the purpose of government. The kind of pure and wholehearted love expressed by my son to me is not just a byproduct, a lucky byproduct of the family. It's the very purpose of family creation. And it is this wholehearted love that holds the world together. Although families are never flawless, children are designed to be lightning rods for their parents' love, and parents are lightning rods for their children's love. Of course, this looks a little different sometimes in the teenage years, but nevertheless, of course, the ultimate goal is to love everyone in the world, but you have to start with loving someone. And the people you start learning to love first is your family, and it can't really be any other way. Loving your own children is not selfish. It is what best protects humanity one person at a time, and is what gives every child his or her own cheering section, and it is what fills the world with small, strong pockets of love. The significance of this may be often underestimated. The fracturing of family and the fracturing of the love and consistent connection that goes with it may be the root cause of the horrific societal fallout we're witnessing on so many levels in the world today. The family predates the state and will outlast it. If the state wishes to persist, it must support the family, and it must consider the family in virtually all its public policy decisions. A ruling regime that seeks to destroy or weaken the family is perhaps the worst case of cutting off the branch you're sitting on that I can imagine. The state that understands its role isn't afraid of the family. It understands that the family is the very source of its strength. Governments that seek to protect the basic rights of individuals and families have little to fear from the families of the world. But governments that seek increasing control over their people, the family is the enemy. As has occurred throughout history, totalitarians and various variety of socialist actors have sought to weaken or obliterate the family so that they can usurp the power that the family inherently possesses. They specifically seek to do this by influencing the youth. But the youth of the youth are nestled into families in every nation of the world, and the parents in those families are teaching those children whatever they want. This puts parents in what some might consider the most powerful position in the world. The mother holds an especially potent position. Vladimir Lenin said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." If this is true, and I submit that it is, then the person who gains the love and allegiance of small children is in a prime position of influence. Since the design of anatomy always grants the children of the world directly to women, this places women in a position to establish the foundational beliefs of societies, nations, and the world, one child at a time. There is no greater power than this. If mothers and fathers are teaching their children to support the reigning political ideology, then all is well for the reigning political regime. But if parents teach their children to resist current political ideas, then there is a whole generation being raised up to disavow and potentially overthrow those in public power. Falsehoods taught in the public square will eventually buckle under the weight of common sense and scrutiny, which generally flow freely within the bounds of families. C.E. Sargent explained the power of the family this way. He said, "It is the influences of home that live in the life of kingdoms. Parental counsel repeats itself in the voices of republics. Would that we might thunder it into the ears of all mankind, that a nation is but a magnified home. Home is the great conservator of good, the seating place of virtue," he said. "It is the origin of all civilization. The doctrines taught around the fireside are the influences that shape the destinies of empires." Opponents of free society know this. One early Russian communist said, "Children, like soft wax, are very malleable, and they should be molded into good communists. We must rescue children from the harmful influence of the family. We must nationalize them. From the earliest days of their little lives, they must find themselves under the beneficent influence of communist schools. To oblige the mother to give her child to the Soviet state, that is our task." Perhaps this quote is more relevant today, even than it was during the Cold War. It seems increasingly to be the goal of the state to get the mother and the father to relinquish their child to the grasp of the state, specifically the state-run school with state-mandated curriculum, regardless of parental input or consent. I saw the words parental rights in scare quotes recently for the first time. This anti-family movement has been in motion for a very long time, which I outline in my book, The Invincible Family, which Gail mentioned. But for today, I'm going to focus in on one particular aspect of family destruction that has been addressed in our conference today. I'm going to zero in on how legal movements surrounding transgenderism are setting the stage for the legal marginalization of mothers, fathers, and families by force of law. You'll probably recall when Nancy Pelosi and her associates proposed eliminating the words father, mother, son, daughter, brother, sister, husband, and wife from House proceedings in the name of gender inclusivity. This move is problematic, not just because it's difficult to speak without acknowledging the presence of maleness and femaleness in the world. It is problematic because when women linguistically and legally disappear, so do mothers. Mother is a sex-specific designation, and so is father. If there are not two specific, perceivable, and defendable sexes that can be definitively recognized in language and in law, then it becomes difficult to define or defend mothers and fathers along with their parental rights in legal terms. Therefore, the belonging of children to their parents is increasingly thrown into question, and the family is weakened by the onslaught of transgender ideology, which is exactly the point. In just one of many problematic cases that I know of, a woman who lives as a man gave birth to a baby and demanded that the child's birth certificate indicate that she was the father of the baby. This wasn't allowed in the country where she lived, so she had to go give birth in a different country in order for this to occur. This initiates a profound untruth in the life of the child, which is abated by the state, and opens the door to a host of legal problems concerning the fatherhood and motherhood of children and the very basis of what it means to have or to parent a child. When parents' ties to their children are obscured or weakened, it creates an environment hospitable to government intervention. That's why Marx's manifesto, as we know, openly called for the, quote, abolition of the family. Dethroning the family creates a massive void that must be filled, though it is impossible to adequately fill it. If we are to avoid the attempted domination of the state that follows the disembowelment of the family, we must resist all efforts to cancel biological sex and all expressions of it. Those pushing gender androgyny in public language and public policy are echoing the ideology of radical feminists Shalamith Firestone and others in the mid-20th century. Firestone said, and listen carefully, "It has become necessary to free humanity from the tyranny of its biology and to, quote, eliminate the sex distinction itself so that genital differences between human beings would no longer matter." So what would be the result of nullifying legal recognition of male and female bodies and the relationships that go along with them and that are created by them? Firestone says the tyranny of the biological family would be broken. And for her, this was a triumph. We have been marching down this road. So that this ideology has been out there for many decades. And it's being, as I explained in my book, adopted on many levels, even on the global level, in kind of surprising ways. So we've been marching down this road for decades now, and we're approaching the end game, a genderless society. The vilification of gendered language in public settings is a significant step toward, quote, freeing humanity from the tyranny of its biology and undoing the significance of biological sex and the family. Firestone made another stunning prediction. She happily declared that when biology was sidelined and, quote, transsexuality became the legal and cultural norm, quote, the blood tie of the mother to the child would eventually be severed, and the triumphal disappearance of motherhood would follow. And she was right. If we find ourselves on the side that is cheering for the demolition of motherhood and the family, we find ourselves cheering for the catastrophic collapse of civilization itself. Mothers not only give life to all humans and nurture and preserve that life, but they infuse life with meaning, purpose, and moral direction. It's said that many a man has been saved from the brink of error by this question pulsing persistently through his soul: what would my mother think? Abraham Lincoln credited his mother for all his successes, saying, "All that I am or hope to be, I owe to my angel mother." And likewise, General George Washington famously said, "All I am, I owe to my mother. I attribute my success in life to the moral, intellectual, and physical education I received from her." If we ever cease to function in families with mothers at the heart, civilization will cease to be civil. I'll give you a quick example. Last week in Utah, we had a huge snowstorm. The night before that snowstorm, we were reading the New Testament as a family after dinner. And we read from the teaching of Jesus where he said, "As man would do to you, do ye even so to them." And so we were just discussing it. And so one of us asked my son, "So do you know what that means, buddy?" So it means the way that you want to be treated, you treat other people that way. If you want someone to do something to you, you do that to them. So the next day, in the night, it snowed. In the morning, my husband and I were out shoveling, and my son has his own little toy shovel that he comes out and helps with, which isn't very helpful. But so we shoveled the sidewalk over to where our neighbor's yard line is, and I stopped. And he said, "Mom, why aren't we shoveling more?" I said, "Well, this is the neighbors. They'll come out and shovel it later." And he said, "Mom, don't you think we should live the golden rule and shovel their sidewalk for them?" I said, yes, I do. So we shoveled their sidewalk, and in the middle of us shoveling, he loved it. And he said, Mom, I feel good we're living the golden rule. And so it's just a little example of how when a father and mother nurture the child, focused on the Word of God, great things happen. And the goodness that was already in my son was brought to the surface. And so that's the power of families. It's not only the famous men and women of history who stand on the shoulders of their mothers. Mothers have a greater impact on virtually every person who has ever lived than any other force. And so I say to you that society is not sustainable without mothers. It's important to keep this in mind as we discuss the deconstruction of sex distinctions all around us. So moving back to the transgender issue. The push for sex and gender abolition is accelerating. Here are some examples. A California State Senate committee attempted to ban the words he, she during committee hearings. The Rainbow Voting Agreement in the Netherlands calls for, quote, the registration of gender to be abolished everywhere possible. And a recent article in the New England Journal of Medicine, arguably the most prestigious medical journal in the world, asserted that sex indicators on birth certificates should be reconsidered because, quote, assigning sex at birth perpetuates a view that sex is defined by a binary variable and is as the natural, essential, and immutable characteristic. So that's what they see as the problem. You can't say male or female on a birth certificate because it persists this view that male and female are immutable. The legal and social embracing of transgenderism encapsulates rejection of the human body as inherently manifested in two distinct and complementary forms. This rebellion against anatomy is not only tragic for individuals who wage war on their own bodies, as we've heard earlier today from Billy, but it also undercuts the inherent two-pronged voltage of male and female that propels, balances, and drives the world. If it becomes legally inappropriate to recognize the two bodily sexes or to articulate how the interplay of those sexes creates and perpetuates the basic relationships by which we define ourselves, namely mother, father, son, daughter, then the core of civilized society is in fact in peril. Let me clearly state that I in no way believe that the average transgender child or their parents are out to destroy the family or that they even think of such a thing. They're navigating difficult circumstances in their own lives and should be loved and heard. It is the legal response to transgender issues pushed by drivers of the movement that advances the legal and social erosion of the family. Individuals who are pushed into the transgender machine often come out the other side having suffered harrowing damage, including loss of body parts, loss of sexual function, lifelong dependence on medication, and loss of the ability to become biological parents. These are significant tragedies. The tragedy is compounded when legal actions expedite the desexing not just of individuals, but of society at large. So it's not just old feminists that I referenced earlier who are pursuing the goal of family destruction by desexing society. This ideology is endemic in global education circles today. Teaching gender fluid theory to young children and teenagers is now considered an essential tenet of comprehensive sexuality education. This kind of graphic, gender-erasing sex education is being pushed in schools across the world and right here in Utah. The fight has been going on for many years. We've had many successes, but it's not about to stop. I expose the global sources of this push and the consequences of the movement in my book. I'm not going to go into that in great deal right now. In short, who's pushing CSE, Comprehensive Sexuality Education? Well, for starters, International Planned Parenthood Federation is the leading provider of comprehensive sexuality education in the world. And they have a significant seat at the United Nations table. I've been there, I've seen it for myself. SIECUS, also, the Sexual Information and Education Council of the United States, is also a major proponent of comprehensive sexuality education. The CEO of SIECUS recently explained that they see sex ed not just as a means for talking to kids about sex, but as a, quote, vehicle for social change. In fact, their new logo is Sex Ed for Social Change. The social change they most want to see is the obliteration of the family. They put it in slightly different words, but if you read carefully, that's what it is. These entities embrace gender ideology and, quote, sexual rights for children, and they intend to push these positions to the youth of the world through comprehensive sexuality education and thus achieve radical social change. This is a document published by IPPF, International Planned Parenthood Federation, called Exclaim. It's very disturbing. I'm just going to share a couple of quick quotes from it to show you what their ideology is that they're pushing. Quote, sexuality and sexual pleasure, this is for teens. Sexuality and sexual pleasure are important parts of being human for everyone, no matter what age, no matter if you're married or not, and no matter if you want to have children or not. Also, quote, any limitation on sexual rights must be non-discriminatory, including on the grounds of age. So they've created a whole structure, a whole philosophy on this idea that children have sexual rights. And if their parents or others try to limit their sexual activity, that they're impinging on their sexual rights. And so this is a huge problem. And the gender issue is a very large part of the way that they want to advance their agenda. Okay, so again, if you want to learn a lot more about that and what's happening globally with that issue, you can look at my book. But what can we do? Oh, also, you can look at stopcse.org, stopcse.org, tons of resources there. You can also go to invinciblefamily.com, which is my website. Okay, so what can we do? First, we must recognize instances in policy where these issues are at play. Here are some of them. Gendered language in law, birth certificates and other legal documents, the issuing of those with sex markers on them, forced speech and hate speech laws, commercial surrogacy, puberty blockers and treatment for gender-confused youth, issues affecting parental rights, and of course, sex education and education more broadly. So these are some key areas of focus in public policy that affect the family, specifically on these issues that I've been discussing. To resist the legal gutting of the family, policies and parents must first, there's two main things. First, resist efforts to erase the recognition of male and female bodies in society. Specifically in these areas. Language. We cannot give in to the trend and the push to erase pronouns or to insist that we have to say he, she, and all of those related issues. Women's sports, prisons and shelters, and the draft. And Eagle Forum has been on the front lines of fighting many of these fights, both on the state and national level, and kudos to them for being there. Language, women's sports, prisons and shelters, and the draft. We have to be able to differentiate between men and women in the law. We have to. The survival of the family legally depends upon it. And second, focus on education-based channels through which the destruction of biological sex distinctions are being pushed to our youth. So help to stop the spread of this ideology. And things we can do are to withdraw funding for agencies and NGOs promoting gender ideology to youth and advancing sexual rights for children. Remove sexual rights advocates and sexual service providers, including International Planned Parenthood Federation and its affiliates, from all school programs. Reject comprehensive sexuality education in local schools, national programs, and United Nations initiatives. Again, stopcsa.org can help with tons of resources there. You can talk to me personally. But these are some things we can focus on in public policy. Of course, the more important thing that each of us, whether we're policymakers or parents or anything, need to do is understand these issues ourselves and teach them to our children. We need to teach our children what we believe about sex, gender, marriage, and family. We need to do it consistently, and we need to do it in a positive way. And we can do that. Okay, so remember my little boy? Here he is again. He said to me recently, "Mom, I love you more than 100,000,000,099 things." And this brings us to the good news. As long as men and women continue to cooperate and produce and claim their own children, this kind of love will never die. The love of parents for their children and children for their parents will persist, and it will ultimately triumph. You cannot kill it. The good news is that the family is invincible in its design. It is self-replicating and biologically resilient. So although the fight for the family seems daunting at times, we are on the winning team because we are on the side of the family. In the coming days, I believe people will turn to look at the family and finally see it for what it is. It's not a byproduct of evolutionary flukes. It's not a wart on the face of humanity that must be removed. Families are a wonder of sociological architecture. Families are the vehicle for sustaining individual people as well as societies at large. Families are the way that people learn to love. The family has long been and will always be the most reliable source of food, clothing, shelter, education, protection, dignity, and love for members of the human family. Imperfect as they can be, families are the prime elements that have made life both possible and desirable. Feminist Linda Gordon said, "The nuclear family must be destroyed, and people must find a better way to live together." But there is no better way to live. The best, most successful, most joyful, most sustainable way to live is in families. May God bless us in our work to defend the family as the fundamental and irreplaceable unit of society. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. And Kimberly's book is just right outside the doors here for sale. You don't want to leave today without that book. And I forgot to also